Good morning, Vivian.
Hello.
We're with Mrs. Ray Weaver. Professor Weaver was at Bethel College from the day it was founded until his retirement. And we want to talk today, Vivian, about a subject that I think you enjoy talking about.
Right.
And that's Ray Weaver. Who was Ray Weaver?
Well, I think you would say that Ray Weaver was a lover of all the arts. He enjoyed literature, art of all kinds, and he was a student of the arts. He never thought that he had learned it all. But he was also a performer in both organ and piano, beside, of course, being a father and a husband. So that's who Ray Weaver was.
Ray Weaver arrived with the very first group of professors in 1947. He was a known commodity to the founders of the school.
Ray's family was connected to Bethel even before it was founded. His wife, Vivian, her father, he was involved at the very beginning when they found this campus. He brought his construction company over here. They helped clear the trees. They helped grade things, put the roads in.
They needed somebody in music. They needed a person who could teach, and he had been a musician. When he went to college, he'd been a pianist for traveling quartets.
He was a Renaissance man in that he mastered a number of things. He was very strong technically. He had a mastery of the keyboard.
He would not play the piano, he would command the piano.
I love to talk about Ray. He was an eye-opener. I had never seen anybody play like that, all over the piano meaningfully, with purpose and style. I can still remember the time in one of his lessons, and he picked out When All My Labors and Trials Are O'er. He started toying around with it. Da 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 da. And he goes da 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 da.
He threw everything in but the kitchen sink, and everybody loved to watch Ray perform because he was just in heaven. I mean, he was just having so much fun when he performed, and he'd be all over the keys.
He was devising and arranging and showing me how to play around with a melody. I couldn't take my eyes off of him.
I was a music major and had to take lessons, and Ray was my professor for that. And I'm taking my piano lesson from him, and he was getting a little agitated. He was sitting in the chair next to me, and he just stopped me. He says, "No, Stephen, let me show you." And he literally got on the bench and slid me right off on the floor. And I'm sitting on the floor looking up at Ray, and he starts playing this piece. Nothing's on the page that he's playing except the melody. And and then he got done, he sat back in the chair, and I get up and sit down. He says, "Now do you understand?" I'm going, "No, I don't understand a thing you just did. I loved it, but I can't do that." And that was Ray.
You had to kind of watch out of the corner of your eye, because when he wanted to play something for you, he'd scoot right onto the bench. So you had to be prepared.
His chapel that he offered once a year was the most popular chapel time of any of the chapels here at Bethel College. He would stand up and talk, sort of mumble a little while, and then he would ask the students what songs they would like him to play on the piano. Some were hymns, some were classical pieces. He could play part of a symphony, Beethoven's Fifth or something like that, and he could play Onward Christian Soldiers, everything by memory. And they were the best attended chapels anytime. I don't think anybody took a skip when they knew that Ray Weaver was going to be the chapel speaker. he was probably called at that time, very early in his time here at Bethel, a legend in his own time, because he had such a unique personality.
The stories about him were legendary. You know, the story of his wife having to contact President Panabaker and say, "Ray needs a raise."
She thought he wasn't being paid, and she called the president and was really upset.
And Dr. Panabaker would say, "Vivian, Ray hasn't cashed a paycheck in a year." He hasn't, and found out that they were all just thrown into the back seat.
And here to come find out, he had several months' worth of paychecks in the back of his car.
And he was that kind of a person, but his mind and his heart were in music and in art.
He was eccentric, but the kids loved him. I mean, everybody wanted to be in his fine arts class.
The class I took was the fine arts class that was infamous on campus. I think if you spoke to anyone on campus, they would say with a smile and with much respect that this professor was just the most amazing professor you could know. He was fun, he was energetic, he loved to learn, so he passed that on to his students to love to learn.
His love for learning just bubbles out of him, making it inspirational to the students. For example, his fine arts class.
Everyone had to take the fine arts class, and everyone was excited about it because we heard good things from upperclassmen about this unique individual, Professor Weaver. You know, I have a teaching degree and was a superintendent of schools, and I've never run across another educator quite like Professor Weaver. For instance, one of the things that, one of my first memories was coming to class, and teachers would always take attendance. Well, he'd start with the A's and go to the B's and the C's and the D's, and then, you know, he'd say, "Well, that's enough for today, we'll pick this up again tomorrow."
Some days he might start at the beginning, some days at the end, sometimes in the middle, sometimes he'd do a few and say, "Oh, that's enough of that," and move on. And so you just never knew what was going to happen in Professor Weaver's class, but it was always exciting.
I met Professor Weaver on the very first day of class. Actually, it was before class. We were on our way to the auditorium where he was going to teach Perspectives in Fine Arts. And he said, "I'm Professor Weaver." And I said, "I'm Dennis Engbrecht." He said, "Where are you from, Mr. Engbrecht?" And I said, "I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska." "Oh, Lincoln, Nebraska, the rising penis of the plains." And I looked at him and he said, "The state capitol. It's out there, it's flat, you can see it from miles away." I never expected to hear that from a professor at Bethel College. And I knew right then, this is going to be an interesting class.
He never moved slowly. He always moved fast. And he jumped from one thing to another. In his speaking, he would start a sentence, think about something else, interrupt that sentence, and start another sentence. That was just his way. He was so animated and so eager to pass his inspiration on to other people.
One of the things I remember about his perspective in fine arts is that we all learned the various roof lines of the various barns of North Dakota. What?
I always knew there was a gable, but I didn't know there was a box gable, a Dutch gable, a gambrel, a mansard roof. And so I would find myself just going down the road watching for certain kinds of roofs.
He got students to look at roof lines and see what kind of roof lines the houses had. That was important to him, and as he drove around, he would talk about what kind of a house that was and what kind of a house this was.
In the fine arts class, I teach the architecture, especially barns are included here in Indiana. We take pride in our barns, almost as much pride in our barns as in our house because of the rich soil in this section. We teach these elaborate mansard roofs, gable, gambrel, with weather vanes, cupolas, very fancy barns.
You know, he would jump from one topic to the next pretty quickly. From music to art to architecture to painting, sculpting, whatever. It was just a fast-paced, fun, kept your attention type of class.
What Ray Weaver was like was energetic, funny, a little scatterbrained, but he was great, brilliant man. So he made fine arts a fun thing, which could be a very boring thing.
Another thing that Professor Weaver used to tell us as students was, you can't see what you don't know. And we saw a lot, but we didn't know what it was until I took the class with Professor Weaver, and he told us how all of that fit together. When we came in as freshmen, we would look at buildings. Professor Weaver taught us to look at architecture. We would look at a painting on the wall. Professor Weaver taught us about line and shadows and shade, perspective. He taught us about art. We listened to songs. Professor Weaver taught us to appreciate music and all of the things that went into the music. So my fond memory of Professor Weaver is looking at life out of eyes for an appreciation of art.
I would say that the students that were in his fine arts class got a glimpse of what it means to be hungry for learning and to enjoy what you're exposed to.
I started watching him when I was 4 years old. He never stopped being a teacher. If you want the bottom line, if it weren't for Mr. Weaver, I wouldn't be here.
One of the things that stuck with me about Ray, and it really goes to his teaching style, it taught me when I went into education that if you are engaged and enthusiastic about your subject, you will engage your students, and they will be engaged as well, and they will want to learn because you are so thrilled with what you're doing. And if you can communicate that, the subject matter will come alive, and students, even if it's a mundane subject they care nothing about, if you're enthusiastic about it, they will become engaged.
I find myself looking at roof lines now. I find myself interested in going to art shows and going to museums where there is art. So yeah, he has had an impact on my life. And you know, he was a very sincere man. There was no phoniness about Ray at all. What you saw was what you got. He was nervous. He was impetuous. He ran around. He interrupted himself, but that was Ray. That was just the kind of man he was, and that has left an impact on my life too.
I believe the legacy of Professor Weaver has to do with the way he treated his students, his pedagogy. I mean, he taught in a way that inspired colleagues.
Every time you meet a student who had him, you just have a connection. And you can always tell a story and say, yes, 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 I remember those days and things like that. So I think he impacted every single person he taught.
You know, I thought coming in as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old freshman that, you know, we could outrun, outpace, outwork, outplay, outsing. Nah, this guy he was untouchable when it came to energy. His antics in the classroom on this particular stage. He was everywhere, and you couldn't not watch and couldn't not listen because you might miss something that was going to be extremely important or extremely funny. The thing that I remember about Ray was his energy. Just seeing him walk across campus make you tired.
When I think of Ray Weaver today, and I look around at our culture today, I think what we're missing is Ray Weaver. He had a gentleman's spirit, a peaceful spirit, be good to others, be kind, be gentle. I think that's missing in our culture today. You see a lot of things on TV that are funny, but they're not gentle, they're not kind, they're not of peace. And he had all the good qualities that we're missing today.